It's time for the first 2024 mock draft of the year. I'm finally at a point where I've watched enough of these players to talk about 32 of them. A few notes before we start. This is going to be a 2-round mock draft. I'll be breaking down the first round picks, some of the second round guys I haven't gotten to yet. So there are a handful of players once we get into the 40s and 50s that are still on my list to watch. This is going to be a what I would do mock draft. I prefer that format because I don't have sources. The value that I can add is that I actually watch these players on tape and I can give you my evaluations. Trying to predict at this point when the draft order isn't set, we haven't had free agency. That would just be me regurgitating other people's mocks. And we're going no trades for this first one, except for the first overall pick. I've got the Cardinals trading the first pick to the Patriots for 5, 37, and some future picks. And there's a few reasons I don't have the Cardinals taking a quarterback. Number one, I think Kyler Murray is extremely underrated. I think with a good surrounding core, he's a top 10 quarterback easily. And you could make the argument that one of these quarterbacks on a rookie contract would be preferable to Kyler Murray at 46 mil or whatever it is, but you wouldn't even be reaping the benefit of that rookie contract because you can't get out of Kyler Murray's contract. It would be 81 mil in dead cap if you cut him this offseason. So the Patriots are going to trade up to 1 and take my quarterback 1, which is Drake Maye. And while I talk about the quarterbacks, I'll go ahead and put the second pick up on the screen, which is the Bears taking Caleb Williams. Heading into the year, I viewed it as a toss-up between Caleb Williams and Drake Maye. I thought Caleb had objectively better tape last year, but Drake Maye has more of the prototypical size and build that you look for in a quarterback. But I do think Drake Maye has separated himself this year. Part of that's due to him just playing really well. Part of that's due to Caleb Williams not really progressing that much from last season. He had a really rough stretch towards the middle of the year. Everyone saw the Notre Dame and Utah games, but I honestly think if you look at a game like Colorado, he somehow had 6 touchdowns and 1 interception. The majority of those were like goal line, wide open, flat route. The struggles that he faces at times operating within structure is a real concern for me. And his ability out of structure, I think, is really good when the play breaks down and there's no one open downfield in his first read. He can escape the pocket, buy time, reset his feet, continue to work downfield. But under pressure, which is more of the out of structure plays you'll see in the NFL, he hasn't been very good at all. And he also just fumbles constantly. Like, it's a given if you watch a Caleb Williams game, he's gonna have a fumble at some point, whether it's a botched handoff on a read option. If he gets blindsided at all, he just doesn't have great natural grip on the ball. So that's kind of my spiel for why I have Drake Maye over Caleb Williams. But with that being said, these are my 2 highest graded players over the last 3 years. I still think Caleb Williams has so many good things going for him that he's worth the number 1 overall pick in an average year, or even in this year. I think you could still make the argument for him over Drake Maye. And I also don't think Drake Maye is a perfect prospect either. He has a bad habit of not seeing underneath defenders and throwing interceptable passes. I wouldn't describe him as an inaccurate quarterback, but his accuracy does leave a lot to be desired. But I think Justin Herbert is the best comp. He's got all the arm talent in the world. He can operate from the pocket, but he also has the mobility to extend plays when he needs to. And then Caleb Williams has a cannon. He's extremely accurate. He's such a creative thrower, not just in terms of what he can do outside of the pocket, but the way that he can manipulate his arm angle to release the ball from difficult platforms. And I still think whoever ends up with either of these 2 quarterbacks is going to be really excited about the future. All right, not going to spend that long on every pick, but this is my first time talking about the draft on this channel, so I wanted to get that out there. With the third pick, I've got the Bears taking Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver out of Ohio State. I'm sure the draft order is going to continue to shuffle, but I can tell you right now that these top 3 players are not going to change unless something crazy happens. Marvin Harrison's about as close to perfect as I've ever seen with a draft prospect. He's 6'3.5", 210 pounds, elite route runner, elite contested catch threat. He did have 1 game with some drops. The Purdue game, he had 3 drops, but outside of that, really reliable hands. Looking at Bruce Feldman's freaks list, he reportedly ran a 3.94 in the short shuttle, which would be 99th percentile for receivers. Short shuttle and 3-cone really translate to your ability to get out of your breaks quickly. He isn't an elite yak threat in terms of breaking tackles, but he can definitely run after the catch. And, you know, to truly be a perfect prospect, maybe he weighs like 10 or 15 pounds more. But yeah, Marvin Harrison, Caleb Williams, that's an exciting duo for the future. At 4, we've got the Giants, and I can just tell you right now, this is my least favorite pick in this entire mock. This is a team that really needs to get within range of one of these top 3 players, but I decided to go with Olu Fashanu, tackle out of Penn State, because he's just my clear 4th best player in this class. And my philosophy, since I'm acting as GM of every team, leans a lot more towards best player available, but it's not a perfect fit because they've already got Andrew Thomas, who's a stud left tackle. Olu Fashanu's played left tackle at Penn State his entire career, so you are going to have to move Olu over to the right side. And in this scenario, I've got Evan Neal kicking inside to guard, but Fashanu's one of the best pass protecting offensive tackles I've ever scouted. He's got a great build, 6'6", 320 pounds, over 34-inch arms. He's 21 years old, just routine hand placement and footwork and pass protection. He's not a very good run blocker at this point. I don't think he plays with great leverage, falls off of blocks pretty easily. The Ohio State game, I think, is going to get kind of overrated come draft time in terms of how bad it was, but it was slightly concerning to me. I've watched this guy game after game just shutting down everyone that's in front of him, basically pitching shutouts every single tape. And then we get to the Ohio State game. He's matched up with JT Tuimoloau, who I kind of view as like a third, fourth round type of edge rusher, and he was able to beat him about 4 times with power. I was listening to the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, and Trevor Sycamore was making the point that it's kind of like when Sauce Gardner gets beat on like a 15-yard out route. The entire fan base of that team is like, oh, he cooked him the entire game. And that's kind of the dynamic that's going on. It's not like he was losing every snap. It was just a handful of bad reps. So that game's not really going to affect my grade at all, but it did catch my attention. And then at 5, I've got the Cardinals taking Notre Dame left tackle Joe Alt, 6'8", 317 pounds. Looks like he's been playing left tackle since the day he was born. Being that tall does make it harder for him to anchor. He's just almost never going to be playing with lower pad level than the guy he's going up against, but he's a punishing run blocker, plays with great hand technique, and the Cardinals have a really nice tackle duo for the future. And then at 15, I've got the Rams taking Alabama edge rusher Dallas Turner. This dude's already such a good player, but he has insane potential. He can bend around the edge, he can work inside counters, he can win with his hands, he can win with power. I expect him to run somewhere in the 4.5s, and you see that show up on tape when he's in pursuit in the backfield. There were a couple refs from the Ole Miss game, and I just watched the LSU game where he's carrying a wheel route from the slot receiver down the sideline step for step. So just elite athletic potential, but it's not like he's a project. And if you've ever watched Alabama's defense, like most college defenses, he's not playing a wide 9 teeing off on the quarterback every snap. It's similar to Will Anderson, where if they just had him working one-on-one against the offensive tackle every snap, he might get 15 pressures, 3 sacks a game. At 7, I've got the Packers taking Oregon State tackle Talise Fuaga. I think he's the best run blocking offensive lineman in this class. The Washington State game might be the single best tape from any player in this entire class, at least that I've watched. Normally when I'm watching a game, I'm clipping out individual plays that I might want to use for a video later or just keep for my own evaluation. And I'm halfway through the Washington State game and it's like I've saved every single play. What's even the point of me cutting these up? But it's not just one game. He's moving people off the line of scrimmage, climbing to the second level, blocking linebackers. And in pass pro, he's a really fluid mover, does a great job using independent hands. At this point for me, he is comfortably the 3rd best offensive tackle in this class. So we're gonna have the Packers moving Zach Tom back to left tackle, and Talise Fuaga is gonna be the right tackle of the future. At 8, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's tempting to take a quarterback here, and I think there are a few quarterbacks that could really help themselves over these last 5 or 6 games of the season. But at this point, there's still a handful of close to blue chip prospects that I think are worth taking. So I'm gonna go Leatu Latu, edge rusher out of UCLA. He's the best pass rusher in this class at winning with his hands by a healthy margin. He makes really good offensive tackles just look silly. He's a really fluid athlete, but I'm not sure he has any elite athletic traits. And he's also got 32.25-inch arms, which for me is a pretty tough sell for a pass rusher that's going to win face up with his hands most of the time. And then this isn't affecting my grade for him right now, but he was forced to medically retire at one point. There's a lot of similarities between him and Jalen Phillips, but we'll learn more about the medicals later in the draft process. The Broncos have the 9th pick, and I've got them taking Jared Verse, edge rusher out of Florida State. They've got a lot of bendy speed rushers with guys like Baron Browning, Nick Benito, Ronnie Perkins. So I think Verse fits in really well as a power rusher that can give them a different element, but he's also got some pass rushing moves, really good speed chop to win around the corner. And I've seen some people say he's had a quiet year. I 100% disagree with that. I've watched 4 of his games and he was the best player on the field pretty much every time. With the 10th pick, I've got the Titans taking JC Latham, tackle out of Alabama, 6'6", 360. He carries that weight really well. He's just built in a lab to play offensive tackle. He's got good movement skills, elite grip strength. Once he gets his hands on the pass rusher, he's not letting go, and he just moves people off the line of scrimmage as a run blocker. If they had a stat for like average yards of displacement, he's got to rank near the top of that. He's only played right tackle, but the Titans have a major need at both tackle spots, so you just got to take the best player available there. At 11, the funniest possible pick would be Brock Bowers, but I've got the Falcons taking Malik Neighbors, another great offensive weapon that they can get the ball 4 times a game. But in all seriousness, Malik Neighbors is firmly my wide receiver 2. Outside of Marvin Harrison, I think he's the best route runner in this class. I do have some minor concerns about his ability to beat press coverage, and size and weight is a really big thing for me with receivers. He's only 6 foot, 200 pounds, but I think he can be an elite separator in the NFL. Now, the Falcons need a quarterback, and I think if JJ McCarthy can prove himself over the last half of the season, he has a chance to move up here. But at this point, there's just a huge gap between Malik Neighbors, the next guy I'm going to talk about, and the rest of the class. And then at 12, I've got the Commanders taking Georgia tight end Brock Bowers. I think he's a better tight end prospect than Kyle Pitts. He's not the biggest player, but he does enough as a blocker, and he's an elite yak threat, great ball skills. I have him right now as my 6th best player in this class, but it was kind of hard to find a good fit for him in the top 10, and the Commanders have a major need at that position. The Raiders are picking at 13. We're now at the point where there's no more blue chip players left, so I am comfortable taking quarterbacks outside of the top 2. And quarterback 3 is going to be a hotly debated topic for this entire draft process. I haven't made up my mind on any of these evaluations, but especially on the quarterbacks. But at this point, my quarterback 3 is JJ McCarthy, so that's who I'm going to take. The issue with McCarthy and most of the Michigan players, honestly, is that the level of competition has just been so bad. There hasn't really been a single game where Michigan was at a serious threat of losing, so most of the tape from the first half of the season you kind of just have to throw out. The level of competition is going to pick up. They've got Penn State next week, Ohio State a few weeks from now, and then potentially some playoff games at the end of the season. Those are going to have a huge weighting for JJ McCarthy's evaluation, but his last 2 performances against Michigan State and Purdue I think have been his best games of the year. His ball placement down the field and his velocity and release is just so impressive. And like I said, he hasn't been in a ton of compromising situations, but he's been really effective under pressure. So I think he's the best option for the Raiders quarterback of the future. With the 14th pick, I've got the Colts going cornerback Nate Wiggins out of Clemson. Wiggins is my cornerback 1 at this point. I think his tape has been pretty easily the most impressive of any of the top corners this year, especially since he's come back from injury. He's been going off every game. And the Colts have had a lot of injuries in the secondary, but it's still just a wasteland on the back end. Juju Brents has looked impressive. But yeah, I'm going Nate Wiggins. My one issue with him is that he's only 185 pounds. The Cardinals are up next. At 5, we took Joe Alt. At 15, I'm going to go Rome Odunze, wide receiver out of Washington. He'll be a big contested catch threat on the outside for Kyler Murray, but I also think he's a nuanced route runner. It is a lot of just go balls down the sideline based on how that offense is structured, but I see some similarities between him and Jamar Chase. At 16, the Jets have to go quarterback here. This roster is just way too good to have another season wasted by Zach Wilson or whoever else they put in. So I'm going to go Oregon quarterback Bo Nix. I was extremely hesitant going into his tape. I definitely had some negative preconceived notions, but he looks like a completely different player than what I saw at Auburn and even last year. He's a former 5-star recruit. He's got good arm talent, solid mobility. He's done a way better job this year protecting the football, operating within the structure of the offense, and I think he's really clever out of structure when he breaks the pocket. He does a really good job manipulating underneath defenders, a lot of look-off passes, and he's going to be a player that everyone's watched for 4 years and probably doesn't have that great of an opinion on, but I really do think you've got to go into this evaluation with kind of an open mind. He has shown a ton of improvement this year, in my opinion. If you're enjoying the video, make sure to subscribe and leave a like, and also follow us on all of our social medias. The links to those are in the description. At 17, I've got the Chargers taking Jerzon Newton. Apparently he goes by Johnny Newton now. I've recently seen a lot of people calling him that. He's a defensive lineman out of Illinois. If you watched any of the Illinois defenders last year, there's a 100% chance that he popped out on the screen. He's got quickness, explosiveness. He can win with his hands. He's only got 32-inch arms, which is going to turn some teams off, but I think he's the best and most consistent defensive lineman in this class. And then with the 17th pick, the Bills are going to take defensive back Cooper DeJean out of Iowa. And I love this fit because the Bills play so much zone match coverage. I think it's the perfect defensive scheme fit for Cooper DeJean. And they have needs all over the defensive backfield. The Kyer Elam pick has not worked out. Trey White can't really stay healthy. The safeties are both old and kind of injury prone. So I'm going to take Cooper DeJean and just plug him in the secondary wherever I think the biggest need is. He absolutely has the speed to play on the outside, although I think his best fit long-term might be in the slot because he's going to be a bigger impact in run defense. They've got Taron Johnson with another year on his deal, so they might start him out on the outside and then move him inside next year. At 19, we've got the Saints. Unfortunately, the Trevor Penning pick is looking like a complete bust at this point, so I'm going to take left tackle Jordan Morgan out of Arizona. This is the first player I haven't actually watched yet. He's next up on my list. I have seen highlights. He looks like a first-round offensive tackle. I've heard a lot of good things about him, but I can probably add more to that in a couple weeks. At 20, I've got the Vikings taking Chop Robinson, edge rusher out of Penn State. Really quick hands. He's just a blur off the line of scrimmage. He's the type of edge rusher that I think is just going to terrorize bad offensive tackles in the NFL. He got injured against Ohio State. Hopefully he can return and get some more tape out there, but the Vikings need some more juice off the edge. I think he's the clear best player available at that position. The Cowboys have the 21st pick. I'd love to go cornerback or receiver here, but unfortunately right tackle has become a major need. Terrence Steele has been a liability really all season. The Eagles game from this past week, he just couldn't block anyone. I don't know if he's injured. Maybe he gets healthy over the second half of the year, returns to last year's level of play, but at this point I'm going with Georgia right tackle Amarius Mims. He's only played 3 games this year. It doesn't look like he's going to get back on the field, and this is probably the biggest projection out of any of these players I've got in this mock. He looks like a starting NFL tackle, 6'7", 340, really good movement skills for his size, but it even wouldn't surprise me if he returned to Georgia for next year. To me, he's shown enough in limited action that I'm comfortable taking him somewhere in the 20s, but it'll depend on what grades the NFL has if he decides to enter the draft. And then the Steelers, I also think their biggest need is right tackle, but there's no more right tackles left that I'm comfortable taking in the first round. So I'm going to go with the second biggest need, which is cornerback, and take Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama. He's a lot of people's cornerback one, and he was mine heading into the season. Watching Alabama's tape last year, I thought he was their second best defender, led college football cornerbacks in pass breakups. Really, his one issue from last year's tape was his ability to stop. Pretty much the only time he got beat would be on like a curl route or a comeback, and I haven't noticed that pop up as much this year, but I think there's some other problems that have kind of emerged from this season's tape. The Texas game was really rough, probably the worst performance of his entire college career. He also looks like a good athlete, but not really an elite athlete. You see that show up at the catch point sometimes. There were also some receivers that were able to beat him deep, but he's a really technically sound cornerback. I think he's a classic high floor, low ceiling type of guy, and with him and Joey Porter, I think that's an excellent cornerback duo for the future. For the Texans, I'm looking at defensive line or receiver. I think the best player at that position at this point is defensive lineman Leonard Taylor out of Miami. He has the highlight reel of a top 10 pick, just size, length, explosiveness, speed, pass rushing technique. If he was playing at his best every snap, he wouldn't be available at this point. There's just too many games where he disappears. Like when I'm watching a team, I've got a list of the players that are draft eligible or that are in that conversation, and I make sure to watch them every snap. So for Miami, it's Leonard Taylor, and then the two safeties, Cam Kitchens, James Williams. And when I'm going through their tape, I find myself forgetting about Leonard Taylor sometimes because the safeties are just flying all over the field making plays, and there will be long stretches where Leonard Taylor's just kind of slow off the snap, rushing down the middle. So I don't know if that's scheme, effort, stamina, whatever it is, that's what they're gonna have to find out in the interview process, I guess. But yeah, he's a lottery pick talent, just not really the consistent production and impact that you want to see for that caliber of player. The Bengals are up at 24. In this scenario, I've got them not re-signing T. Higgins, and they're gonna replace him with Keon Coleman, wide receiver out of Florida State. He's got some of the best hands in college football. My guy Jetpack Galileo on Twitter has coined the term arrogant hands. That perfectly describes Keon Coleman. He can just pluck the ball out of the air with one hand. He can body you up at the catch point with a defender draped all over him. He's listed at 6'4". To me, he looks more like 6'2.5" if I just had to eyeball it. And I always have concerns about these contested catch receivers, especially if they're not elite athletes. Like I expect Keon Coleman to probably run somewhere in the 4.5s, and we've just seen historically that doesn't really translate at a very high rate to the NFL. And I think I'm a little bit lower on Keon Coleman than most people. I just don't think he's that advanced of a route runner. He isn't very sudden out of his breaks. He gets hung up by press coverage a lot more often than you'd like to see. He is the best run blocker out of any of the receivers that I've watched, so you've got that. And I think he's definitely a late first round talent, but I'm seeing him go in the top 15, even the top 10. That's just way too rich for me. And honestly, the next receiver I've got off the board, depending on what he does to finish the year, I could see him ending up ahead of Keon Coleman on my board. With the 25th pick, I have the Seahawks taking quarterback Jaden Daniels out of LSU. His tape has blown me away this year. It wouldn't surprise me if he ends up as my quarterback 3 or 4. That's how big of a fan I am of him. The reason I've got him as my 5th quarterback at this point is that he's really skinny, and he is just determined to get in a car crash every single game. Literally, he's just inventing new ways to get hit and contort his body in some different way. So I have some concerns about him holding up from a health perspective at the NFL level, but purely on the field, he's been playing lights out. With the 26th pick, I have the 49ers taking cornerback Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia. I've only watched 2 games of Georgia tape at this point. This is a player that it wouldn't surprise me if he rised after I watch more tape. They've got him at 6'180". He looks a lot bigger than that to me, but he had some really good reps against Luther Burden for Missouri, who's one of the best receivers in college football. So he's a player that from what I've seen, I'm higher on him than the 26th pick. I just need to watch a few more games. At 27, I've got the Dolphins taking left tackle Patrick Paul out of Houston. He's been one of, if not the best pass protectors in college football. The level of competition hasn't been great, but I thought he had a really good performance against Texas. He's allowed 5 pressures all year, and he has a PFF pass blocking grade of 94.9, which is insane. Over 36-inch arms, but I don't think he's a project with just really good length. He knows what he's doing with his hands, and the Dolphins need a long-term solution at left tackle. With the 28th pick, I have the Jags taking edge rusher Chris Braswell out of Alabama. I think he's one of the more underrated players in this class up to this point. Dallas Turner's definitely the better prospect, but it's kind of wild to me the difference in attention that they're both getting. I think Braswell's maybe like 90% of the athlete that Dallas Turner is, but he's actually better at using his hands. He's more technically refined as a pass rusher. He has a lethal cross chop, and I think him and Josh Allen will be a really formidable edge duo. At 29, the Lions are going to go receiver A.D. Mitchell out of Texas. I can already tell you about 5 games into his tape, this is going to be one of my guys in this class. He has probably the biggest disparity between production and how good his tape is. If you just watch him run routes, this is a wide receiver 1 in the NFL. He's 6'4", fluid as a route runner, really good at the line of scrimmage, good ball skills. The production has finally started to increase recently. He had 8 for 149 and a touchdown against Kansas State, and regardless of whether or not Jamison Williams works out, this is going to be an immediate upgrade to the Lions passing game. With the 30th pick, I've got the Ravens taking another one of my guys, TJ Tampa, cornerback out of Iowa State. He's 6'2.5", physical press corner, one of the most aggressive corners in college football. He's an impact in run defense. If you try to throw like a flat route to his side, he's going to lay a huge hit. And he also has really good instincts in zone coverage. He had a play against Cincinnati where he was like the flat corner in cover 2. He stays shallow and then at the last second sinks back, intercepts the corner route. I just think he can do everything from a coverage perspective from what I've watched. And then at 31, the Chiefs are going to upgrade the receiver position with Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. To me, he projects as just a really high-end wide receiver 2. He isn't the most explosive, doesn't have like elite deep speed, but he's a really refined route runner. He has good ball skills. He can adjust to difficult passes down the field, and I think he'll be a player that Patrick Mahomes can trust to always be in the right spot. Now at 32, we've got the Eagles. I can already see the comments about how they don't draft certain positions in the first round. That's great, but what I'm going to do is take Cam Kitchens, safety out of Miami, and as a spoiler, with their next picks, I'm going to have them taking a cornerback and a linebacker. They've done a really good job of building this roster by investing in the most valuable and important positions on the football field, but at a certain point, like, you need all 11 players to be at least passable, and they have some major issues in the back 7 that they need to address. Cam Kitchens, to me, has best safety in the league potential. He just has a handful of really rough plays on tape. The UNC game and the Georgia Tech game, he was just like out of position really in both phases. He gave up a couple touchdowns and then he took a bad angle on a running play. But if he can just get a little more consistent about being in the right position, he can be one of those true game-changing impact players at the safety position. That's going to do it for the first round. I'll put the second round mock up on screen and talk about a few of the picks that might be of interest. I've got the Giants replacing Daniel Jones with Michael Penix, quarterback out of Washington. The Rams are going to take cornerback Kalen King out of Penn State. I will eventually get to his tape from last year where apparently he was way better. I know a lot of people have him as a first round player. His tape this year has been very underwhelming to me, not just the Ohio State game. The Titans are going to take Xavier Worthy out of Texas. Perfect fit with Will Levis if they can get him some pass protection. He's just looking to chuck it down the field every play. I've got the Chargers taking Johnny Wilson, who's a 6'7" receiver for Florida State. I have him as a tight end because I just don't know that he can beat press coverage in the NFL. Like, it's so easy for corners to get into his frame, even though he is really quick for his size. Ladd McConkey is just a killer, one of the best route runners in this class. I have him going to Buffalo. I've got the Bengals taking Mekhi Wingo, defensive lineman out of LSU. I like him better than a lot of the other defensive linemen in this range. I think he's kind of underrated, but he's out for the season, I believe, with an injury, so I don't think we're going to get any more tape on him. And then the running back class is very weak. I do have one running back going in the second round, Travion Henderson out of Ohio State to the Ravens. He's the one guy I've watched that I think has elite game-changing athletic traits, and my running back 2 would be Jonathan Brooks out of Texas. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments any NFL players or teams that you'd like me to cover.